call. So I'm recording this call in case you want to know for our recording purposes, so that we have this. If everyone ever wants to look back at this, and maybe we'll put it up in some form on Sugya. So that's the overall background for what this conversation is about. Last time we had Lee Moore from Kent State Hillel and the Lippman Camper Foundation for Living Torah present her ideas about what fluency is, and we had some really interesting conversations about possible definitions, about the limits of the notion of fluency. We talked also about citizenship. We threw out a number of different concepts that could be related to fluency. The final thing that we've done to add into the mix here, which is a real experiment, is we have a site, a platform that we're using to help us both collect all the content and the anything written that we're using, or anything video, or any of the media that we're using for these conversations is being put up on this Sugya site. That's a closed site for anybody who's in this working group. Udi Leon, who's on the phone with us, is the head of that site, along with many other hats that he wears and projects that he's run, and he's helping us facilitate the conversation. You should know about the site that it's not meant to be static; it's meant to be active. And if it's successful, and we would see also having some of the conversations that we're having now, you could continue some of that conversation on the site. You could add resources, you could comment, etc. So I just want you to know that that's there as well. And we're going to use the site today. That's where we've put all of Ilan's materials. Any questions before I introduce Ilan? Okay. So Rabbi Ilan Schwartz has come to Hillel just a few months ago. He is a senior Jewish educator at the Ohio State University, Hillel there. He is a graduate of AJU, is that right?
Yep.
Yes, okay, good. And he's been thinking about this questions also. Fluency, and he has a very different perspective, I think, than when we've covered so far. So with that, Ilan, I'm going to hand this over to you. Should I give you control of the screen? If I can?
That's great power. I don't even know that I know what to do with it.
So you want me to? You tell me where to go, and I'll do the presenting.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. If you could actually turn to Cultural 3, the third case study. I want to start with a story about this particular student who's right now a senior on our campus. He came into my office a few weeks ago. He was teaching at a board meeting a couple days later, and he said, "Rabbi, I'm sorry, I've been a bad Jew. I haven't been to Hillel all year."
So which one is it? Sorry, say it again.
Cultural 3. Okay, and this is a senior.
Okay, here goes, everybody.
And I said to him, first of all, we've seen you quite a bit over the course of this year, but let's take a little look at your rap sheet, which is what I call these, and see just how much you haven't been here recently. Turns out that this student is a frequent flyer, not the most frequent or the least frequent, but he's here more often than he's not. And he's got nothing to be ashamed of because he's been a leader, he's been involved in social action, he's come to Shabbat from time to time. He's involved in all sorts of different things around campus, and he's a recognized leader in our community. And it was this conversation that really got me thinking about fluency, not just from a what do they know, what do they not know, but two different types of fluency. Cultural fluency, meaning people who are around our buildings all the time, except when it comes to ritual things. We never see them at Shabbat. We don't see them at the holidays. But if there's going to be a Greek Seder, they're going to be there. Or if we're doing a social action event, making sandwiches for the homeless, you can count on them to be there as well. As opposed to those of our students who are ritually fluent, the ones who are at Shabbat, who are at holidays, who are there for learning, and who really engage in deep, sort of more, much more deeper relationships with us because we see them so much. Those are the two ritual examples that I have that we'll talk about later. And I really have come to the conclusion over the past few months that there is value in both of those types of fluency, and I want to get into a little bit of the background as to why there are two types, and then look at the different case studies and talk for a moment about the role of data in all of this, and then I prepared a little text study because it wouldn't be a gathering of Jewish educators if we did not do some learning. So again, you see this individual's rap sheet, as I call it, and you see he comes to a lot of different things, and he's been involved in leadership. He's in relationship with a couple different staff members. So as I said, he's got nothing to be ashamed of. He is very much Jewishly fluent, just as much as the person who comes to Shabbat every week.
Can you see my screen, everybody? Can you see the rap sheet?
Now we can, yes.
You can? Yeah.
Yes,
Yes.
I couldn't before, but now I can.
Great.
So we'll get to the more specifics about him later on when we talk about him as a case study. But I wanted to make note that this is the student that really got me thinking about all this, and he's a really nice guy. He's going to work for Amazon next year. So he might be coming to a city near you. Who knows? So part of this sense of fluency has to do with good Jew versus bad Jew and guilt and emotions and things like that. So I want to turn your attention to the first article, which is by Rabbi Yossi Marcus, who's a Chabad rabbi in Northern California.
Hold on. For you. I did that. I think I sent out in advance, but I'm getting it.
Okay, but before we start reading the article, I just want to ask sort of, has anyone had those conversations with students before where they come in saying they're a bad Jew because they didn't do X, Y, or Z, and how you'll react to those conversations or those bold statements? Anybody?
Yes.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Lee.
You go ahead first. I'm muting.
Okay. Yeah, so obviously it's probably a pretty common thing. So I have a student here who actually was my education intern this past semester and was an engagement intern and was an Israel intern. And I would say at least once a week he still says to me, I'm a bad Jew, which has always made me kind of cringe a little bit. And we have conversations all the time about, that there's no such thing as a bad Jew or all that sort of thing. And I think it's very indicative, I think, of a certain type of culture that I think we really need to work to change, which I suppose is probably the point of this conversation, that somebody like that who has internships and now just got a board position for the coming year thinks of themselves as a bad Jew. And it's always been surprising to me when students like that say things like that. And I hope that we can work towards making sure that that nobody thinks they're a bad Jew, but even more so the students that are actually leaders in our communities. Because what does that say about our community if our leaders, for whatever reason, have it so ingrained in them that someone has made them feel that they're a bad Jew?
Absolutely. As though we have to undo years of identity suppression and things like that. Because there's something inherent, it's amoral all these things are amoral. It's not a moral question as to whether someone's a good or a bad Jew. I guess it could be to a certain extent, but for our purposes, it's not really a moral question. Lee, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I've been kind of tracking this phenomenon for a couple of years now, and I just wanted to point out that some people love to say I'm a bad Jew. So it's actually, ironically, even though somebody pointed out once, it's almost a way of people identifying negatively or something like that. They're still saying I'm a Jew, right? But they're like putting their lot in with the Jews, but saying I'm a bad Jew. There's something really striking happening with this, that it's like a way of people claiming their Judaism, but doing it in a way that lets them off the hook for necessarily sort of, having a sense of obligation or whatever, something like that. So I think it's a fascinating cultural phenomenon, and I think it's excellent to take a look at it.
So, Lee, let me ask you then, when a student comes to you and says, Rabbi Lee, I've been a bad Jew lately, what's your response to that, given that your knowledge is sort of a cultural phenomenon?
Yeah, well, it's similar to Vera's. I'll just say, what are you talking about? What is that? What does that mean? Like, I often respond with a question, just to be like, I don't understand what you mean by that, because obviously you're such a good Jew, you do X, Y, and Z. And so, clearly your idea of what it means to be a Jew and my idea of what it means to be a Jew are different. And I'm going to lay out a concept of what it means to be a Jew that disabuses you of the notion. But what I've noticed, though, is people don't want to be disabused of the notion. People often like this idea of being a bad Jew. And so it's tricky. A lot of it depends on the person, too.
Right. So you're really channeling what Rabbi Marcus has to say. If everyone sort of looks down, I'm just going to count paragraphs here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The seventh paragraph, where it says, "But something doesn't smell right." He writes the following: When a person says, "I'm a bad Jew," what they're really saying is, "I know what a Jew is supposed to be, but I am a failure in that department, and I've kind of made peace with it. There is some guilt involved, especially when I meet a rabbi, especially one with a beard, which I assuage by stating that I'm a bad Jew, i.e., this is the way I am and I cannot change. So I am absolved, but I'm not still completely happy with the situation, which is why I'm bringing it up." I think he kind of captures what you were saying, Lee, right on the money.
Exactly. That is exactly what I experienced. Yep.
And I experienced the same thing with this person as well. He clearly wanted to change, to improve or do better, but couldn't recognize that he was starting from a point of goodness to begin with. And he continues on a couple of paragraphs down that this is a subject of low Jewish self-esteem. And he writes later on, because being a good Jew means primarily being a good person to bring God and godly notions such as justice, righteousness, and kindness into the real world, being a good Jew does not mean going to the synagogue. Yes, a Jew has to go to the synagogue, but that's not what defines him or her as a good Jew or Jewess. More central to being a good Jew is how we behave outside the synagogue. And most of the people that tell me they're bad Jews are pretty good people outside of the synagogue and inside too when they show up. That hits, I think that really, I think it hits right on the money to the type of students that say this. They're generally good people, objectively speaking. Would we like for them to come to Shabbat more? Sure, we would. We'd love for every student to come to Shabbat. But that's not where these students are. And so with this student in particular, who has been a leader in our social action group for 3 years now, he's a good person outside the building. And so, maybe is he not the Jew he wants to be? That's a separate question. But by no means is he a bad Jew. And I think that that's a really important thing to realize when, people come when people come with these kinds of bold statements. I also want to add this student is from New York, and I wonder if students who joke around about it are also from New York. I wonder if it's a New York thing. I could be wrong about that, because being a good Jew in New York means eating bagels and lox on a regular basis. So I wonder if it's a geographic thing as well. But I wonder what's that?
I think you made an interesting distinction, though, that I came a little bit late, so I may have missed, but I think you kind of glossed over this distinction between feeling like you're a bad Jew, not the Jew that you want to be. And okay. I think it's an important distinction. I had a student email me a couple of weeks ago and said, I feel horribly because I haven't been to services and I haven't been studying and all of this. And she specifically said to me, it's not because I feel like I'm a bad Jew because of it, but it's because I promised myself I was going to do it, and I haven't lived up to that promise for myself.
Mm-hmm. Who is that speaking?
Sarah Magida. I'm the Reformed Community Educator at Rutgers.
Hi, Sarah. Welcome.
I wonder if you could expand on that a little bit, and maybe say more about what the student's sort of past involvement was, or how do you handle that situation?
So she happens to be a freshman. I took her out for coffee when she first got here, and then she said she was going to get involved. She got involved in a couple of things, but not really. Then after her email, we've started, this was like right before Thanksgiving, so we studied together once, and we're studying together again this week, but that's going to be hopefully an ongoing thing, because that's what she wants, and to take advantage of this feeling of I'm not the Jew that I want to be. And it doesn't make me a bad Jew, but I think someone who can say I'm not the Jew that I want to be, like that's something that we can take advantage of in a way that someone who says I'm a bad Jew, like if that's what they mean by it, then we should take advantage of it the same way. If they're saying I'm a bad Jew for other reasons, then I would want to disabuse them of that notion. and think differently about it. But I think you can capitalize on this feeling of I'm not the Jew I want to be, and I think often that gets expressed as I am a bad Jew.
Right, but I also I would prefer to keep them separate, because I can consider myself a bad Jew, but that's the kind of Jew I want to be. So I'm not looking for Jewish improvement per se. I'm just acknowledging that I'm not the kind of Jew that everybody thinks I should be.
Yeah.
But I agree with you as well that those are excellent moments to capitalize on when students come and they do want to be better. They do want to be better Jews, whether they're good or bad from a starting point. So those are important moments to capitalize on.
And understanding which one they mean when they say I'm a bad Jew.
Yeah, I'm trying to think about when this person came and talked to me. I don't know that he's going to be anything different, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure about this student. He's a good kid. Anybody else want to chime in on this sort of secondary distinction?
Yeah, I time that when students tell me Jew, it's more sort of like the way that he's talking about an article of like, well, usually it having to do with Jewish ritual things in contradiction to me. Like, I think especially students know that I'm Orthodox, so like all the students that'll like text me and be like, hey Vera, I'm really enjoying my bacon right now, #bad Jew. And that's not because like he wants to stop eating bacon. Like he doesn't like, right, but it's like this weird sort of like, it's like almost a badge of honor, like I'm a bad Jew, like you're a good Jew, but I'm a bad Jew and it's awesome. So I definitely, and I think it's interesting that it is always sort of around what I would think of as, kashrut or Shabbat or things like that, rather than, you don't see students, texting me being like, hey, I just spoke Lashon Hara about a person, #bad Jew, right? Like, so I think that's also a very important point, that it's really about like how people are viewing sort of traditional ritual life in relation to themselves, usually when they're sort of terminology.
So let me ask you, Vera, as an Orthodox Jewish educator, how do you handle, the kid who texts you saying eating bacon, #bad Jew, and sort of the wide difference between your observance and theirs?
I usually respond with eating bacon doesn't make you a bad Jew. There's plenty of sort of like along the lines of this article of, here's all the things you do that are good, that are important to being Jewish as well. I think that, and like I said before, that I think if we focus too much on like traditional ritual as, what makes someone a good or bad Jew, like we're losing a lot. So while I would probably not go up to a student and be like, you should eat bacon right now, that's definitely not what I believe. I'm very, very hesitant anytime to, try to say like, oh, I think that is like problematic, even if like I for myself think it is problematic.
Right. I want you to hold the thing you said just before about ritual and things like that not being the barrier for Jewish success and fluency. I want you to hold that thought for a few moments.
Can I ask a question? Sorry, it's Abby.
Yes.
Why, Vera, why not say to the person, well, actually our tradition, at least in traditional sources, those things are considered, not in keeping with Judaism. And why pretend? I don't like the term bad Jew, right? Because like that, as we've been talking about, means so many different things. But there are things like, I just find it like it is a very strange position to take, right? That we do, I think almost all of us take because of the pluralistic work we do. But it is a strange position to take, like, hey, I do this, but you don't, and it's all okay. Well, I don't know. Is it all okay? I mean, I think we'd all agree that, like, if the person, was speaking Lashon Hara all the time, let's take that example, right? If that person was completely a slanderous person, we would say he is not a good person. Whether we'd say he's not a good Jew is a different story, but we'd say he's not a good person. And I think there might be a distinction also between just not being a good person and not being a Jew who embraces ritual. I can't quite articulate it, but I feel like we need more work on why we're so hesitant to say to people, well, actually, you're right. Eating bacon is not in keeping with our tradition.
So, Abby, this is so interesting. I'm sorry, I'm jumping in here just for a second. But it's so interesting, this conversation, and I think we need to be having this conversation with lots of people out there. This is an excellent frame for a conversation. when I hear Vera's story, I think it's great because the student is reaching out to her to connect, right? And even though it's connecting again to this negative thing, they're still like acknowledging it, right? They're admitting it. They're saying, I know this isn't the right thing, sort of what we've been talking about. I don't think the right response in that moment as a relationship builder person is to say, well, actually, eating bacon isn't a good thing to do. That person knows that already. They're clearly demonstrating that, and that they're choosing to do it. It's like acknowledging that it doesn't actually affect their Jewishness because they're a Jew no matter what they do. I think it's dangerous to respond with some kind of judgment of any kind of what they're doing.
So let's just pretend for a minute that we were Chabad professionals. Not that I'm a trained Chabad person in the slightest, so I don't really know how they would respond. But if I can imagine a Chabad rabbi saying, well, why don't we try a week not eating bacon and see what that feels like, right? Not judgmental, but an embracing, wow, how interesting. You're obviously thinking about it. What if we did a little experiment, right? Now, I understand that's probably not the approach many of us would take, but I'm trying to figure out why not? Because, again, I agree with you, Lee. I would never want to make anybody feel ashamed or bad or in all the ways, especially, right, if you take the rap sheet that Elon showed, like, we want those students to keep coming, and I don't care what their observance is, obviously, but I also think it's interesting that we're so hesitant to push people in ways that might actually be good and deepen their Jewish experience.
So I think that question of why not actually try it is actually a really great response. I also think I used to work with high school students, and we had this annual event where we'd go to dinner in New York, and we went to a kosher style restaurant that was not kosher, and one of the students, it was a Jewish style restaurant, it wasn't kosher, and one of the students asked me if he could order, we'd ordered chicken for everyone for dinner, and one of the students asked me if he could order a milk. And
a what? Say that again.
A milkshake. And I said that he could order the milkshake if we could talk about the difference between biblical kashrut and rabbinic kashrut, and that we could spend a certain amount of time having that conversation. And at the end of it, he understood why I was comfortable with him ordering a milkshake with his chicken, but I wasn't comfortable with him ordering a pork sandwich. Not that that was on the menu, but like I wouldn't have been comfortable with him ordering a pork sandwich. And so I think there are lots of opportunities. I said to someone recently, I would rather have a student who doesn't keep kosher and can explain to me why he or she doesn't keep kosher than a student who keeps kosher but can't explain to me why.
I want to just chime in for a second. Abby, I think your idea is great, but it depends on the student. Some students can handle being told to try it for a week, and some students that'll make their head explode and we won't see them again ever. So I think it really, all these things, all these types of fluencies and things like that, it all depends on the individual student. I have a student who I was at somewhere with her and she was eating bacon. If I asked her to give it up for a week, yeah, she would probably do it and she'd take it as an interesting spiritual challenge. I have others who would laugh in my face and I wouldn't see them, like, not like in a mean way, but like laugh and say, no, that's just not possible for me, and that would be the end of the discussion. So I think it really depends on the student and what they're capable of, because I want them to keep coming. I don't want to scare them away. I don't want them to think that I'm trying to get them to do something that they're either not capable of doing, not ready for, or whatever, what have you.
Right. So, but there's another question too, which is the underlying question, I think, which is also, is that something we want to, like, is this a kind of fluency, if we want to call it that, or a kind of practice that we really want students to take on or not? Meaning, it's only worth asking that question if we think that there's inherent value in it. Right? I mean, right. So to get into the question of like, well, which of these things, like, do we think that kind of, if we want to call it ritual fluency, like you were talking about, it might be cultural fluency. I'm not sure where it falls in. Maybe it's cultural fluency. Like, is it important to get them to experience what keeping kosher is like? Is that part of what we think is cultural fluency when it comes to we want our students to be? And if the answer is yes, then I think this conversation is very productive. Then how do you engage students in doing that? And what are the questions that we ask or the things that we do to help students think about that?
I think in my mind, part of the answer has to do with expanding their horizons. And for a student who keeps kosher already, we can't just say, okay, great, check that off. There has to be some way where they can expand their horizons. And for the student who eats bacon, maybe the way of expanding their horizons is trying to a week where they don't eat bacon, and maybe it's understanding why we as Jews traditionally don't eat bacon, but they're going to opt to continue to do it anyway. But for me, it's really about broadening their understanding, whatever that means.
I want to add also because we could talk about bacon for hours. I'm told it's rather delicious. What I want to another nuance to this that I'm discovering is that we were sitting in a staff meeting and someone on staff said, "Oh, we never did Shabbat as a kid, but we always had special foods, and my mom went to the bakery and so on and so forth." I was like, "Well, you kind of did do Shabbat, you just didn't call it that." So part of the sense of fluency means forcing students to look into their lives and to understand that there is Jewish practice and Jewish influence even when it's not called that. I think that's a part of it as well. The fact that the students there had to ask you, felt that it was important to ask you to order the milkshake and understood that a conversation was to be had, says to me that there's some sort of inherent, some light in his head went off at that point. Oh, maybe there actually is a problem with this, and let me discover whether it's a problem for me or not. So I want to make
in terms of just that cultural fluency, you did do something special for Shabbat, you just didn't know about it. Even the fact that the student is sitting here telling me he's a bad Jew because he's eating bacon is him telling me that he knows that bacon and Judaism go together in a certain kind of way, right? To be able to even open that conversation, which I think, so when I see it, rather than trying to talk to them about maybe you shouldn't or whatever, to me it's I've already gotten to a point where the student is willing to talk to me about bacon, because students might not even do that. So I think that's so when you said that about students are at least you're trying to at least make them aware of things that are an issue in Judaism. I think we need to think of some of these comments as they've already gotten to a certain point that I think almost out of hand discount, because we're just so used to knowing certain baseline things that we don't even think, oh, this student knows something and has information about Judaism that they want to be sharing with me.
Okay.
Does that make sense? I don't know. That was a little convoluted in my head, but
it makes perfect sense.
Totally. Knowledge, and also I want to add one more word to this discussion, which is boundaries. It feels like to some degree people are testing boundaries around these things too. To say, okay, I'm doing this thing, I'm not doing that thing, I'm eating bacon, look at this, I don't know, just that's what's coming up for me is people testing boundaries.
Okay, I want to move, because I want to be mindful of everybody's time. I want to move on to some of our case studies. I'm going to skip the next article, but I would encourage everyone to take a quick look at it. And if you'll open up, either on your computer or Abby's going to open up on the main screen, the case study for Ritual 1. This is a graduating senior. He's actually graduating in a few weeks. He's graduating early. And what you need to know about this student, first of all, it's a male, and his family came from Russia in the early 90s. So that might sort of give some mitigating explanation. So if everyone will open up Ritual 1, I want to move into our case studies. And we have all this information because we are punctilious in our collection of data, and there's going to be lots of sessions at the General Assembly, Global Assembly for anyone who's going. You can hear all about data, probably from people on the staff here at OSU. But we can take a look at this student's rap sheet, as I call it, and really understand what kind of fluency he has when he leaves. Does everybody have it opened up?
Can you see it?
I can't see it on the main screen.
Oh, no?
No, I can't see it.
Oh, I wonder why. We'll try that again. Present. Okay. There might be a better way to do this.
Refresh the page. You might need to refresh the page. Sometimes it gets stuck.
Now do you have it? Is it too small? No?
I don't see it.
Let's see if I can do it another way. Sorry. If I add an attachment. 1 second. No, one second. I'm gonna hold on. I apologize. I think it was too small anyway that way, but it's Ritual. You said which one? Ritual?
1.
Yeah.
They're really very similar.
Yep. Let's tell me if this works, guys. I'm sorry that I'm not so good with. No, okay, it's not working. Maybe start talking through it as I
Okay.
will get it up eventually, but.
So what you'll notice is that this person has been to a lot of things. Over the course of his 4 years here at Hillel, he has been to over 130 individual events, and been in relationship with almost every staff member, been a student leader. He has really done everything. But what you'll notice about his list is that so many of his things are either Shabbat, holidays, or something ritually or educationally based. You will not see him at a social event, really. You will not necessarily see him at a brunch on a Sunday morning. You will not necessarily see him at let's see what else. He scoops in the sukkah. You'll see him because it's in the sukkah. You will not see him at anything that's directed at Greek life, but you'll see him every Shabbat, guaranteed. Anything religious, Havdalah. He's been a stalwart of the conservative minyan. If there's you can count on him to be there if it's ritual or observance based. This student is prepared to go out into the world and do Shabbat on his own, be involved in a synagogue if he chooses to. He doesn't need my help really for anything. Also, if there's food, he'll come as well, but that's neither here nor there.
Do you see it?
Yeah, I can see it.
Great.
And I want to say that, I think that here at OSU, we do not have a lot of students like this. And so when it sort of comes up, we almost don't know what to do with ourselves because they're so few and far between. And, we're glad when they come, sad to see them leave. But I want to honor this student in the sense that this is one type of fluency, and this is the fluency that I think the organized Jewish community wants him to have. Now, it so happens he's kind of an introverted kid anyway, but if you turn to the other ritual students, Ritual 2, which I'm going to open up now, okay, this student is a completely opposite personality type. She's in a sorority. She's involved in all sorts of things, but so much of what she comes to has to do with Shabbat and holidays and things like that. She is super prepared to live a full Jewish life when she leaves, and she even wants to work in the Jewish world. This is a she, this one right here. And she's also a graduating senior. But if you look down her list, you'll see that she's a consistent attender of Shabbat and other sort of holidays and ritual things, but I see very few social things on her rap sheet. She was not coming to spray tan, as it were. Also because she has darker skin, she doesn't need spray tan, but she was not going to be there no matter what. And I think that that's a really interesting, these are really interesting types of people because we don't really have to work very hard for them. They want Shabbat, they want sort of that ritual life that we build here at Hillel. And we don't have to be, these are not the students who are coming to me saying that they're bad Jews. So I just wanted to point these out. And again, we have this information because we are really crazy about the data. So there's that. Now, if you'll turn to some of the cultural ones, you can pick whichever one opens up easily.
Anyone. Number, give me a number.
1. Lucky number 1. Okay. This is our immediate past student body president, and he now actually works for us. He gave me permission to share his name. His name is Derek Grossman. Derek is from New York, from Long Island. He roots for the Mets, which is really all that's important about him. He's on our staff now, and you rarely saw Derek at Shabbat or at a holiday thing. Rarely. I can count it only a few times over the course of his college career. He was involved in API, involved in other things on campus, and he was our student board VP. But what you can't tell me, and what I want to make an argument towards, and I welcome people's thoughts on this, who is more culturally fluent, Derek or these other two students who have been to more ritual stuff? That's the question that I want to throw out there. Who is more Jewishly fluent, and why? I want to make the case that they're equally as fluent. Alex doesn't. Oh, Alex, I said his name. My ritual students don't need my help to make Shabbat. They don't need my help to build Jewish community. They know how to do it. Derek, on the other hand, hasn't necessarily been to Shabbat, but he knows that Shabbat is a thing, and he knows where to find the resources to do what he wants. And he knows that if I do, he wants to do Wings and Wisdom, which is a program we do for the fraternities here. He wants to do it with his alumni friends who are local to Columbus. What do I say to that? Of course I'm going to say yes. So I want to argue that the two of them are just as fluent as the next. Their fluencies are different, but neither is more or less prepared than the other to leave the college campus and lead a Jewish life. And that's the argument that I want to make. That these two types of fluencies, the ritual fluency of my fluent students and the cultural fluency of Derek and others like him, are just as equal, just as important, and need to be just as valued from a professional perspective on our side. And I wonder what people think about that.
Hey, Elon, this is Josh Bolton speaking. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay. I guess, one thing I've been sitting here quietly reflecting on is, of course, I agree with you, Elon, about the point you just made. There's different types of fluencies, or rather, our culture is expansive and big enough that you can be fluent in it in different ways or in different, corners of it. But I've been also just sitting here reflecting on, again, the metaphor of fluency. And I think sometimes we're forgetting that it's a metaphor. And I've been reflecting on having to learn a language, like learning Hebrew, which I didn't, start doing until, actually really in a serious way until I got to university. And how even after a dozen years of kind of study and exposure, I don't know if I would consider myself fluent as a Hebrew speaker, much less in Hebrew-speaking, culture. And so I'm struck by the amount of the really extensive amount of time and what's the right word, immersion that is required for someone to become fluent in a language or in a culture or using this metaphor, a thing or an idea. And I'm thinking of, and this is kind of challenging me because, I don't know if 4 years, I mean, it's not like we have students every day for 4 years to work with on their fluency. Like maybe Hillel provides daily a whole host of different opportunities, and maybe that's the way we need to think about it. It's not the educator's role only, but the Hillel has to, think pedagogically about or educationally about every single aspect of its program, such that if a student participates, weekly or monthly in a whole host of different ways, then they're, able to immerse themselves and grow, and maybe some type of fluency is able to develop. But the fact of the matter is, I don't know if fluency, after listening to this talk for so long, is a very helpful goal. Growth is a helpful goal or a helpful, metaphor. But fluency is a high bar. And so the second thing I was thinking about was, like we were talking about bacon for so long and about kashrut. And I was starting to get bugged out, as I sometimes do, about rabbi educators and educators. Like, we think fluency has only to do with Jewish ritual life, and not say like Jewish identity and and assimilation in modernity or whatever. And I was thinking, like, there's hundreds of categories and corners in terms of Jewish identity that you have to grow in or you have to learn about in order to become fluent in Jewishness. And the fact of the matter is, I'm struck by where we began a lot of these conversations by, we want students to be fluent, so what are the top 10 things that we need them to discuss or to think about, to learn in order to become fluent? And like, that top 10 is like, just, it's marked only by like what our concerns are. But, there's another top 10 and another top 10. We can have, dozens of top 10s that are totally different from one another. And I'm thinking less now about like what is it that we need students to learn about, as much as I'm thinking about how and in what different ways we want students to be growing in terms of Jewish knowledge that is not limited to Jewish ritual knowledge. And I'm also thinking about the significance of, like, and this is something that is easier said than done, but has been drilled into me, which is at the beginning of the year, or in the case where someone comes to you and says, I'm a bad Jew, that you ask all the students what they want to, or how they want to grow over the course of, the month or the semester or the year, as opposed to, like, coming anywhere close to dropping on top of them a top 10, list of ways that I think you should grow in order to become more fluent. I mean, like, that could work too, but that list is, that list is arbitrary in the sense that there are dozens and dozens of things to learn and grow about. So I'm thinking about all this stuff. I don't know if there's any coherence to that, but I'm just struck by the limitations of fluency as a metaphor for us, because I don't know if we have. I'm just struck by its limitations suddenly.
Yeah. Josh, I just want to add that something you said earlier, which is that we only have 4 years with them. They're not even here every day. So the question is, how much experiences, knowledge, whatever word we want to use, how much we need to impart on a student before we pass the buck to the next point of Jewish contact, and by what sort of standard do we want to do that? And I think that the difference between Derek and these other students really exhibits the fact, as you're saying, that there are many different types of, I'm going to use the word fluency. I don't have a better word at the moment. There are multiple types of fluency, and what I want to stress is that as professionals and as educators, we need to honor all the different ways in which students choose to be either fluent or not fluent in Judaism.
I think Josh just dropped off the call. I wonder if he's on a train, so I wonder if he just entered a dead zone. I'm curious.
Or he was offended. Either way.
Right, he said an outrageous thing, and then he hung up. Provocative thing, I should say. So I'd love to hear other people's responses to that also, because if Josh is right, we can just hang up and not do any more of these working group calls, and we'd be done. I know, Elon, you also might have things you want to share. From the rest of what you presented, but I'm curious also to hear particular responses to Josh. Do you agree that that's just not the goal? Growth is the goal. Fluency is not.
So I think there should be both.
We can't hear you.
Hi, this is Elise. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. I think that there is a synthesis between those two perspectives that's really relevant here, because even if we can identify in a student a particular trajectory of fluency that's most organic for them, there are probably a fairly definable set of trajectories that we could look at and prepare what fluency would look like in each of those. And then as educators, we can be agile and nimble about dancing between them if we have someone who doesn't fit precisely into one category or another, and that having the resources readily available to think about what is right for that circumstance is still an excellent model, even though we don't necessarily want there to be a single answer to the question.
Right. I would also like to, I definitely agree with what Rabbi Winnick just said, but I would also say that when I was thinking about sort of your two different models of students, Elon, what struck me, like, I think I also sort of see that same phenomenon that we have some students that like come to Shabbat every single week, but not anything else. And we have some students that come only to, more social events. I would argue actually as an educator that neither of them is as fully like fluent as I might want them to be, and perhaps it's our role to push, even the student that does come to Shabbat every week, maybe you should try, like we were talking about before with like the eating bacon example of like, maybe you should try something different, try something outside your comfort zone, because what are we really doing if we're just, okay, we've provided you with these experiences and you chose what you wanted and then you walk out the door? Like, yeah, I think that's valuable too. Obviously, we need to be providing those, but I think if we have some sort of idea, and again, not like Rabbi Winnick said, like there's not necessarily one model that fits everybody, but if we have some sort of definable set of things that we want people to achieve on their way to growth or whatever it is, that we might want to try to cross over those two different types of students, so they're not just sitting in their boxes, and so they learn that they can be in community with people that maybe have more different interests or things like that. Because I think that's another concern, at least for me, that is that, part of Jewish fluency or whatever it is we're calling it is really the ability to be in community with Jews that are different from you, or that, know things that are different from you. And if you never step outside of your comfort zone, then what are we doing, right? What's our role here? What are we doing for you at the end of the day?
Yeah, the challenge with that, Vera, I think you're 100% right. I don't know that I have the time to do that. I don't know that I have the time to focus so much on an individual student such that I'm making sure that they go to Shabbat and that they go to, social events and things like that. If I see them consistently, the thing that they come to, like, to a certain extent, has to be good enough.
Sure.
So, if I would love to be able to really focus on each student, make sure that they're getting a wide range of experiences at Hillel over the course of their 4 years. I just don't know that that's realistic in terms of the time that we have available to us in the day.
So I think actually it again goes back to like, what are our goals? So just to repeat what Josh said, he was trying to throw out fluency, which I'm not in favor of, but I am in favor of what the other thing he said, which is actually it's about growth. So if all we're doing is filling out rap sheets, which I think are awesome, by the way. I mean, I think the fact that you track it's amazing. But if it's just about tracking and saying, well, great, this person showed up 8 times, so now we're done, the risk is that, well, they're doing just, it's great because they're engaged and involved, but there isn't growth. If we think about just, our strategic plan, right, Hillel International Strategic Plan, we have different categories in some ways. I mean, I think they help us only a little, but in the sense that we have the 40% and the 20%, right? 90, 70, 40, 20. And the 40% are people who come 4 or more times or interact with us 4 or more times. And the 20% are the active learners and leaders.
You're forgetting the 1% who have a cot set up in the building.
Right. So I think the fact that we have that 20%, which is aspirational, right, is very much about we want them to continue to grow. And I think what you're showing, at least some of what I'm seeing from this, both the cultural and ritual fluent students is that's awesome. If only we could get more students to either of those, I certainly would think that would be amazing. But I think if we stopped there, there's also there's a real loss. And I agree with you. Like how do you actually do everything on campus, because you clearly can't.
Right, and that was the real purpose that I brought these two types of fluencies to the table, because once the next step is probably going to be to figure out like sort of a checklist almost of what constitutes fluency, but I felt like the different types of fluency needed to be put on the table before that discussion was had. So that was the real reason that I wanted to bring this type of data that we have and these ideas about good Jew, bad Jew to the forefront. Before we finish, I just want everyone, if you could turn to the text that I prepared. And I've fallen in love with Safaria recently, kind of obsessed with it.
Word.
I had one thought about the percentages that you were discussing.
Yeah.
Sure.
Which is, I once had a professor who suggested that synagogues should be trying the same thing, where there's like 20% super engaged, 20% pretty much unengaged, but they're members, and then 20% that are like peripherally engaged, or 40% that are peripherally engaged. And I don't know the numbers, whatever, but he suggested that rather than trying to get the entire peripherally engaged group to the center, figure out who the 5 or 10% that are closest to the center are, bring them in, and then work on the next group, and focus your energy there. And that's not to say that you ignore the rest of the groups, but I thought it was an interesting model in terms of thinking that way.
Yeah, and I would also add, before we get to the text, I'm going to give a shameless plug for something going on at the Global Assembly. It'll only be slightly shameless. We're going to be doing a breakfast one morning. I'm not sure exactly when, about honoring the Jewish things that students do on campus that they didn't realize were Jewish. So I think that also plays into all this as well, that who are the immediate 10% who are active in, the university's like dance marathon for charity and are really involved in that, don't realize it's a Jewish thing but are. And if we counted that, well, then they immediately move from, the percentage of people, like the type of person that they're in, to another type, the more active and engaged type. So I want to shamelessly plug the breakfast that we're going to do. I don't have any details on it, but I know that it's going to be on the schedule, so you should come hear that. I want to finish with a teaching, and it's from Shmot Rabbah, and I stumbled upon it. It reads as follows. I'll read it in English. Another teaching, and these are the laws. The other nations have judges, and Israel has judges, and you can't always tell the difference between them. It is like a sick person who is visited by their doctor. The doctor says to his family, feed him whatever he asks for. The doctor goes to another sick person and says to their family, be careful for him, that he should not eat something ordinary. They said to the doctor, to the first patient you said he can eat whatever he wants, but to the second you said that he should not eat something ordinary. The doctor said to them, the first one is not going to live, so I said he could have anything. But this one who is going to live, I told him to be careful. So it is with other nations who have laws but are not engaged in Torah. Of them it says, I have also given them laws that are not good. But of mitzvot, it says that we should do them and live. That's the secondary point. And what I want to sort of leave us with is that there's a prescription for each student. And what is the fluency prescription that we are going to write for them, or that they're going to write for themselves using our prescription paper? How are they going to utilize Hillel to get the type of Jewish fluency that they want to have by the time they leave college? And that's what I want to leave everybody with. And I welcome your questions and comments.
That's great. That's great.
Unless there aren't any, which would be a first for a group of educators.
I love that. I love that source.
It's a great source. I've really stumbled upon it, as I do from time to time.
I mean, if I had to summarize this call in one sentence, which is absurd, but I'll tell you what, at least what's settling for me is the idea that there are fluencies, but that it's plural, and that we need to find the right fluencies for the right people.
Maybe we should change the name of the group to Jewish Fluency's Working Group.
Right. I'm not sure I'm 100% comfortable with that, and that's something I don't know that I think is 100% right, but I am drawn to it in a certain way, and it's something I'm leaving this call with, and especially with this the midrash sort of to hammer it home to say, well, actually there are different prescriptions for different people.
There's a teaching that we share a lot at the foundation I work for, and we attribute it to Rav Kook, but I actually haven't been able to find it in anything in Rav Kook, so I don't know. But it's that Judaism is like a house, and some people feel most comfortable in the kitchen, and some people feel most comfortable in the library, and some people feel most comfortable in the living room or the dining room socializing, and that, according to, like, each one of these is kind of like a different set of types of fluency. And absolutely there are, we should honor the various types, but we should, at the same time, I'm not trying to tell us what else to do, but my feeling is honor the various types and be open and curious to continuing to give students options and make sure that they are aware that there are these various types and that they could continue to grow, back to the growth piece, by both expanding their fluency in any one of the types and in trying something on that's new. But not to have expectations that students will necessarily attain a certain level of mastery of any of them, or something like that. That's kind of what I'm taking from the call.
Right. This makes me think a little bit of the Lulav and Esrog thing. I think it's also in a midrash somewhere totally. That the Arba Minim represent 4 different types of Jewish people. One that we have different tastes and smells, and so the taste and smell represent learning or good action. And that actually, your different students that you have reminded me of this also, Elon, that you have some that are more sort of in the learning box and some that are more in the, right there doing the dance for charity or something like that kind of box, and how, bringing all 4 of them together, right, sort of the point of the Arba Minim is, right, you're holding all of them together, that all of these types of Jews together, we need to be able to create the community that we want. So I guess that's also sort of something that I was thinking of that relates to this as well, and that it's important to show all our students that each of these other students has just as much fluency as them also, right? I think that's the other crucial piece, that it's not the ones that have more learning often think that they're the ones that are better somehow than, the ones that are out doing charity. And usually the ones that are out doing charity are not the type that think that they're better than someone else. They tend to be a little bit less than that in that kind of way. But I think you have this idea that you need to show both types, that both types are important, and you don't necessarily have to be or become the other type or a different type, but we all need to be able to be together, and we're all important.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Elon, for leading such an interesting conversation.
My pleasure.
You should, visit Sugiya. I would say we should add the 2 last sources. If anyone finds Lee's source about the kitchen, I think, about the house, I think it's beautiful. And I have the Midrash about the Arba Minim, so I'm happy to also add that to our collection of ideas here. If we would like to continue this conversation, I'd love for somebody shoot me an email and to volunteer to lead the next one, and we'll schedule it. I really want this forum to be, a forum where you can test out your ideas and grapple with things that you're working on related to this larger conversation of fluency. So thank you again, and hopefully we'll see many of you in just a couple of weeks, and happy Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah.
Yeah. Thank you, Abby.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Abby. See you in a few weeks.
Great.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.